I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding AM 333-2022, purchase of emergency shelter systems from Air Shelters. It is Friday, June 17, 2022. We are noticed from 3 to 4 p.m. It is 3 p.m. now. We will start with Assembly member introductions.
Pete Peterson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Mike Zalatel.
Christopher Constant, and I just have to note that I regretfully can only stay for about 15 minutes, and so I'd love to hear what I can before then.
Suzanne LaFrance, and then on the phone, I believe we have Ms. Allard.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Are there any other members on the phone? Also in the room here at the table, we have
Joe Gerace, Anchorage Health Department.
Kelly Isham, Anchorage Health Department.
Amanda Loach, Office of Emergency Management.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
Thank you for joining this work session. And two things before we begin. I want to note that the document for this work session, AM 333-2022, which is on the addendum for the June 21 meeting, is available online. If you go to muni.org, click on Assembly, and at the top, Assembly Work Sessions. And then first, I will go to Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gerace, when we had this before the Assembly, you were very clear that this had nothing to do with homelessness services and wouldn't be used for homelessness services. I just want to verify that that's still the case before I participate in today's work session.
Yes, ma'am. Zero intention of using these for anything related to homelessness, even closely. This is a medical response situation.
Okay,
and
thank you.
support. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. And I understand we've been joined by Mr. Solt on the phone. Mr. Solt, are you there?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And with that, I will turn to Mr. Gerace to walk us through.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I had stated at the Assembly meeting, these are air inflatable, and we have a video we could play for you. Kelly here runs our Emergency Preparedness and Response Department. I know there were some questions related to, when I say response, you asked about some OEM questions. So we're here to answer those. But essentially what we have here is a standard system in Anchorage. The hospitals own this. We own one already that I referenced the last time. We own one already. It sits in a trailer. These can zip together, and we could put in succession, we could put 10 of these together if we had to. And the idea behind these units are that we have a response capability. We have a response tasking to provide medical overflow support. That could be a hospital that has a mass cash event. It just could be maybe somebody slams into the ER entrance and we need these things. So I think the video might be the best thing to play for you. It's less than a minute. We delivered it to the clerk. Thank you. There we are. This is inside the Fire Training Center over off Airport Heights Road, and you'll see it's time-lapsed here. And again, normally 2 to 4 people max needed for this, but what you see here is we were training the firefighters. We have the support, just while we're going through this, of all 3 fire departments that the health department touches, supports us having this capability. And what it really is a lot of things, but it's a medical expansion, as you're going to see here in a second. The state has these. Alaska Native Medical Center has these. Providence has 2 of these. I might have those backwards. One might have 1, 2 at the other, but there's 3 out there at hospitals. And as you're going to see, it inflates real quick. So they're getting ready to hit it, and here it comes. And it's going to be bright colored here when it pops open, so you can't miss it. And that's that. So as the discussion came around homelessness, you can see it's not even designed for that. It is designed for quickly deploy like that. We could use it outside an entrance. In an emergency response, that could be the decontamination area. And like a lot of areas, we can't hose somebody off that has contamination, for instance, because it's -12, they would freeze. So these have a lot of potential from an emergency response standpoint. And again, this is a spend down of a grant.
Thank you, Mr. Gerace. I have Ms. Zalatel and then Mr. Dunbar in the queue. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two different questions. My first is what types of things are allowed under the funding source that's identified generally? I understand what you would like to spend it on, but what is kind of generally, like what have we been using this grant for and what could we use it for? And then more specifically for this potential purchase, how does this purchase and having these air shelters intersect with the currently adopted comprehensive emergency operations plan? Any identified capacity for this particular use, especially hearing that there's considerable community investment in this type of equipment already. So I'm kind of curious of how we've identified that we need additional capacity beyond what the community medical, I guess various medical providers already have. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm going to have Kelly answer a few of those, and then Amanda can answer about the comprehensive plan. That's why we brought them. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, again, Kelly Isham through the chair. So this grant was originally the COVID-19 community grant. It was previously used in part for a few other things. I believe it was assisting with testing as well. When it came down to me, the state grant administrator had informed us that it could be used for emergency preparedness activities. We gave a full list of everything we'd like to use it for. The state instructed us that some things were no longer eligible or were not eligible at all under this form of grant. The few things that we did already get, we got a few heaters that could be used in conjunction with these or other tent systems. And then these were identified as a purchase that we were able to make. One small point is that the previous tent that Director Drace mentioned that we do have was purchased off a grant from 2011. That video that you saw was from 2012. And that was the Metropolitan Medical Response System grant. So it was a fire grant that the fire department was unable to use all of. I think they reached out to the health department at the time. Staff said, hey, this would be a great thing to get one of. And that was all that grant afforded at the time, along with a few other items that came to the health department. But again, this does, our primary focus is mass prophylaxis. So either giving out vaccines or providing oral antivirals or antibacterial medication, mass care, and mass casualty or medical surge. So as the director mentioned, setting up outside a hospital, whether they had an internal disaster and couldn't operate, and we would just provide surge, or we would provide a place for triage to happen before people entered the hospital. This was used by several area hospitals during COVID, where they were triaging people prior to entering the emergency room. So this does expand our capability to offer those services and structures. After the earthquake, should damage have occurred at those facilities as well, this could have been, every hospital has a plan, that they will use buildings of opportunity. However, in an earthquake, anticipating that some of those buildings might be further damaged. These buildings, these tents, and I don't like using tent or shelter, but it's a shelter system. And as you saw it is decent size, but it holds 16 partitioned medical beds that would be placed there by the hospital. So the hospital would use some of their own equipment, put it inside this facility, and could operate it with heat. Also, because it's inflatable, it automatically has that built-in airflow, which does help for communicable diseases if we were using it for that.
And if I could just piggyback on Madam Chair, we maintain quite a lot of medical surge equipment in addition to the hospital. So that equipment was used at the MAB clinics over at Tacotnu in support of 4 or 5 agencies. So we regularly get requests from DHSS. We respond out with our equipment and assist them. So it could be anything from those planes that had diplomats on them to just they ask us to stand something up in response to a cruise ship pulled in with people that were sick, or a fishing vessel, that kind of thing. So just so you understand, we maintain all that equipment currently. Thank you for some surplus equipment to Director Loach. And my segue here, she had some surplus trailers. That's what we're filling now, is these trailers. Instead of disposing them, we took possession at the health department on our interagency transfer. And the idea is that we're going to stretch these out, because we found out during the 18 earthquake, we had to try to get equipment from the Airport Heights Fire Station all the way out to the Chukiak Senior Center, where we deployed we opened a shelter post the earthquake for Eagle River. And that was a real challenge, trying to weave through traffic on the shoulder of the road with a Super Duty towing a giant trailer. If it was out there, it would just be a cross-town move. We were very fortunate the bridge didn't come down. As you remember, it was one lane getting to Eagle River. And so these things are going to stretch from Chukiak to Girdwood. And we've worked with those 3 fire departments. I did want to mention that. Thank you. Director Loach can answer the comprehensive question.
Hi, thanks. So through the chair, I'd just like to thank you for having me. My name's Amanda Loach. I'm the Municipality of Anchorage Office of Emergency Management Director. I'd just like to take a couple minutes to talk about the difference between the Office of Emergency Management and the Emergency Operations Center. The Office of Emergency Management is the day-to-day planning, mitigation, and recovery entity for coordination in all hazard, disasters, and emergencies. And in the event of an emergency or disaster, we activate and support of the teams that are working on scene. So we do information and resource coordination, which I know you've heard a lot of in recent times. We work with many departments and partners, but we don't do it alone. Each of those functional areas that we have to deal with, whether it be emergency comms, emergency response and services, debris management, damage assessment, they all have subject matter expertise and leaders in those areas that we just don't have the expertise or the resources to address properly. So the Anchorage Health Department is the lead, as Kelly said, for health and medical services. They have day-to-day expertise with their team there, and they work alongside us not only in day-to-day basis, but also in the event of emergency. They're one of our leaders that works in the EOC to help us. So in an emergency, the quicker we can respond, the quicker we will recover. So in our interpretation of what we've seen of this resource, not only is it a very quick response entity, it also has the versatility of being able to combine with those partner resources in the hospitals, which can increase capacity in many different ways. So we also try to stay really as nimble as we can in problem solving. So the way that Mr. Gerace and Kelly are talking about using it in different capacities, that's something that we would support and also distributing it around the jurisdiction in case we needed to provide mutual aid to neighboring jurisdictions, et cetera. So hopefully that was helpful to you. If there's following questions, I'm glad to answer.
Thank you. Before I go to Ms. Zalatel for follow-up, I'll go to Mr. Constant, who has to leave.
Thank you. So I'm glad you're here, Amanda, to talk about the public or the emergency response perspective. We haven't heard yet from, and I don't see here the building official or somebody who's prepared to talk about wind and safety and security for these facilities. So, and I have to leave. I'm hopeful that somebody can speak to how these temporary structures will perform in our wind loads, not in the generic wind loads, and as they're rated, because I believe their rating is up to 50 miles an hour, but we have oftentimes gusts of over 50 miles an hour and prevailing winds sometimes that are above 50. And so I want to understand if we've built in a protocol for management in wind conditions, and I want that known in advance. But it's not something I think that I would try to hold up the process for, but I would love a briefing on that. So I do have to leave.
So a quick answer.
Sure.
For a quick answer, Adam has reviewed it. It does not require any further from Adam Trombley's department because it's a temporary structure. The short answer is we would factor weather, and we do this all the time. When the wind kicked up, we shut down some of our vaccination sites and moved to fixed sites, like keeping the blood bank open. So this is a common thing where we start to deploy stuff. We look at the weather forecast, and if the wind kicks up, we would break this down. But it is not intended to be deployed in winds. It can handle sustained winds of 50 miles an hour, but we would not deploy it if we had a weather forecast for, 100-mile-an-hour windstorm. We wouldn't deploy it on the hillside. So we factor that into the response, and we would use a different resource that could be tougher to get. Like one of the current resources we use are people mover buses come to the scene of major incidents because they're a little more fortified. This is meant to be a little different situation. But that's the quick answer. Adam has reviewed and is on board also. I thought maybe he was going to stay, but he said he had a challenge.
So Adam isn't the building official, and the person does work under him, and it would be great to just have some written position through Adam from the building official to address the wind, because I do understand Title 23 has temporary structure requirements for wind and other issues.
Yeah, and just real quick, through the chair, this is again an emergency structure that would be erected to short-term deal with an issue. Having worked as a paramedic for many, many years, I wouldn't drive my ambulance and am not allowed to drive an ambulance when there's sustained winds at 50 miles per hour because that's unsafe. We also wouldn't be able to deploy these trailers in those winds as well. That would be extremely dangerous. So obviously we do have to look out for the responder safety so that we can better take care of individuals. But in that instance, if it wasn't an earthquake and winds at the same time, we would probably be using one of a hardened structure that is there already. If those were also damaged at the time that we were dealing with winds, we would have to separately take a look at that. But we'd only move forward if the actions were safe for the responders and for those that we're trying to save.
I understand that theory and I agree with it. And so I'd love to just see a review of the code and make sure that it's in alignment. And I think that our firefighters do, in fact, in ambulances that mobile ICUs respond in above 50 because we get those conditions a lot. So anyhow, thank you, everybody. And I'm sorry I have to leave.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And I'll go back to Ms. Zalatel. Did you have follow-up on your question? And then after that is Mr. Dunbar and Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had one question. I think that got lost in the shuffle, which is what this capacity here, why do we need our own capacity when we seem to have some capacity already in the community? So is there like a target capacity for these kind of structures as your emergency planning as a community? And is this going to help us get there? Are we going to be over it? Where are we going to land?
Yeah, so our goal capacity for our alternate care site would be a 150 bed capacity, providing that, and each one of these does provide about 16 beds. Obviously, that does shift if you're taking care of someone who needs significant medical care versus someone who doesn't. But the goal would be to provide potentially a portion of that care at multiple sites at one time. So these tents, ideally, this system, one would be put possibly out in Eagle River, one would be put down in Girdwood. The other ones would be strategically located throughout the city so that they could be moved to various parts at any given time.
Thank you. And the 150 bed capacity is what you hope to achieve at the health department, but not for the entire community? Because that was my question. I heard in the initial presentation that a lot of the hospitals already have these. These are really common. And so this would be for our own municipal capacity in addition to what the community already has?
Correct.
Okay.
Again, we would be hopefully marrying this system with the systems that those facilities have to increase their capacity. We're more of a force multiplier for other agencies as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think my first question was already answered. So we've had one of these. Obviously, we're asking for 7 more. So the one we've had since 2011, I believe, sort of how many times have we deployed it? And I think you said that it was deployed during the 2018 earthquake. It was used out in Eagle River Chugiak at the senior center. Is that what you said?
Sir, the trailer was deployed, but because we had a hardened, undamaged structure, in the trailer are beds, blankets. I mean, it's a response trailer. We did not deploy this piece, but the trailer itself did respond to Eagle River to the Chugiak Senior Center because we were sheltering all the people that were displaced from like the trailer park and stuff. So while the trailer deployed, this structure was not needed to be erected. That building checked and passed municipal review, so we used the building itself.
So in the 11 years that we've had the one, how many times have we used it?
I am unsure that at this moment, sir. We're both new to the health department 1 year. So I would have to we had pretty high turnover in that department with departure. I am unsure, so I don't want to mislead you.
Okay. That would be great to know if possible by the 21st. And I guess my follow-up question was going to be about whether we used it during the pandemic, but it sounds like that we're not sure, or we didn't use it because the folks that really needed it, like the hospitals, they already had these. They were using them themselves.
We can answer that one. We did not deploy it during the pandemic. We had used a lot of contractors, and the health department had kind of a pass-through concept. So it was not deployed. All the other supplies were. In fact, we had expended all those other resources supporting Fairweather out at Tecotnu. We stood up several clinics around town with our equipment because they were working off-site. And so we supported 5 different clinics that were working around town.
And so my understanding with these is it's like a kit, not just a tent, right? And so the one we purchased in 2011, was it also a kit like that? So are you saying that we used sort of the other stuff that was in that kit, not the tent itself, but we used the beds or?
Yeah, just through the chair. So what we are proposing to purchase are 7 kits that would enable it to be heated or cooled, to be inflated. The other alternate care site items, such as the cots, blankets, pillows, IV poles, those are in addition to. So we have most of that. Most of that was recouped or sustained throughout COVID.
Mhm.
So we still do have those items. What would come out, as you saw in the video, that cage that came out of the trailer that held the shelter, that's part of that kit because it is extremely heavy for a couple people to carry by hand. But
Okay, so this purchase doesn't include the the IV poles, the cots, that kind of thing. That's not part of this.
correct. And again, not only do we have most of that already, but if we are bringing this to a facility that has an internal disaster or is damaged, the idea would be that they would be able to utilize some of their own equipment and their personnel to staff these systems for their full capacity.
Okay. One other small set of questions, Madam Chair, and this is, feel free to bring this on the 21st if necessary. But so I understand that there are these international building codes that deal with things like fire resistance, egress, that sort of thing. Are these facilities subject to those codes because they are temporary? Are they not, I guess I should say? Are they subject to it? And if they are, do we sort of have documentation that these meet the codes?
We have a verbal answer. Adam sought all those answers from his department, Mr. Trombley, and the answer is they are not subject to that. They are not subject to that, but we could get you that if you would like a letter. I'm sure we can get the building official to say that, use during an emergency. We could definitely get you what you asked for. He's made a note. We'll get that with it, plus how many times we've used the other system we
Okay.
have. One of the points about the other system, it's fairly limiting having just one of them because we really can't. If somebody says we need a place to do 50 treatments, we have 16. It would be nice to be able to have 4 in one trailer that we could set up to take 50-ish people, 48, and that kind of thing. So that's what we're looking at too, is putting 3 or 4 in single trailers and having a bulk trailer that could go set up a 48 bed, 52 bed location.
Yeah.
So thank you, sir. But we'll get you the answer on IBC.
Thank you. One last, Madam Chair, and I'm aware it's late Friday afternoon, so we all want to get out of here. One of my concerns with this grant, and I understand it's a state grant, we're spending down the grant, and I do understand that in something like the Highland Avalanche, or if there's a problem in Girdwood, we want to have this kind of mobile, sort of almost like a forward operating, environment. I am a little concerned that because of the events of the last couple of years, that there is sort of this to me is almost always going to be inferior to a hardened structure, right? And if we actually did have a mass casualty event, to me, it makes more sense to use one of our rec centers, for example, than tents for a variety of reasons. And plumbing, I mean, being probably one of the biggest ones, right? And so, do you see a set of circumstances where there's some kind of mass casualty event or other kind of emergency event in the city, and we don't have a problem getting, it's in the city, and so we could transport everyone from there to a facility like the university center or something like that. And instead, we use this. We set up something in a parking lot, for example, because we don't, for whatever reason, we feel like, we don't want to bother the people at Spinard Rec Center or something like that. I mean, can you assuage my fears on that we aren't going to deploy these kind of when it would make more sense to use a fixed structure?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So through the chair, sir.
There's a happy man.
He's running away.
So long.
We're jealous.
So long.
The answer would be, I'll give you a great example, sir, would be a plane crash. You think, oh, we're going to transport those people. But for instance, let's use a plane crash. One of the high probabilities is that people are contaminated with jet fuel, especially if it's at takeoff. So we would use this to decon them. We're going to strip their clothes off. They're going to need a private place that we can then treat them, decon them, cover them with a blanket, put them in that A car, and send them to Prov or regional to a trauma center. So that would occur on site. This tent would be that resource as a good example. The other part, you might have a situation where a wildfire burned through a piece of town. I was in Dixie last year. Burns through. There's nothing. There is no hardened structure. But we need to look at those people and decide, we have to triage them somewhere. It's 113 degrees out in the sun. I know it's not in Alaska, but it could be minus 12. We need to decide who is critical and can be transported, because the hospital will tell us delay everyone but the red tag folks, which is criticals, right? The greens can stay. So they have a fractured ankle. They're not going to die from that. They would stay in the tent. We would run all the criticals from that fire, the building collapse to there, and we would hold the people there in that tent for safekeeping. And then when they say send us the yellows or the greens, we would step down the response. And that's where Amanda's department would say, we're ready for yellows now, or send all the yellows to the J-Bear Hospital. We'll take all the code green stuff. So that would be another example of where it's not actually meant for that structure, but in participation with the hospital, we could use this for decon. You could have somebody just gets contaminated with some dust that is toxic, and we need to, strip them down, go through the sanitation process that's part of a medical response. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll just say one note that the first example, the jet fuel, I think is very good. The second, with people with broken ankles and that thing that we want to delay them, to me it makes more sense. I mean, again, it depends on the circumstances, but it makes more sense to go to like a high school gym and wait there before you send them to Prov.
You have a transport problem a lot of the time. So we have a limited number of ambulances. Those ambulances are going to be taking the criticals to the hospital. I do understand what you're saying. What we find on a lot of these, as you saw during the pandemic, the old response model we were sitting back here talking about was we would activate mutual aid. The problem in a bigger disaster is there is no mutual aid. The valley's not coming, and we may get something from Homer, but they're 4 hours away to load that fire truck. So this is that stopgap measure that allows us to provide that safe place to shelter somebody out of the weather, awaiting the proper transport, sir. Thank you, though. Great questions. That's really nice to get to talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next is Mr. Peterson and then Ms. Zalato.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, my first thought about this when I first saw this on the agenda a couple of weeks ago was that we had an avalanche that closed the Seward Highway between here and Goodwood, and there were injured people. And so you needed somewhere to keep them warm, triage them while you're waiting for the helicopters to come by to fly them to Providence or whatever. Or it could be an avalanche like the one out in Eagle River, Chugiak area. And there were some injured people that you didn't have enough ambulances to carry them all out at once. And so a facility like this could serve as a triage area or a temporary headquarters for emergency services while you're getting organized to try to figure out what exactly happened and what do we do next type of situation. So it's great to have flexibility, because you all in the emergency departments know you can't predict what's going to happen or when it's going to happen or where it's going to happen. So you have to be prepared ahead of time. And I think this gives us flexibility. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Alatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think this comment/question is for Ms. Loach, which is, I look at the comprehensive emergency operations plan. It was last updated, I think, in October 2017, at least what I can find online. So as we consider updates, hopefully we're considering those soon. We've learned a lot of lessons during the pandemic. It would be really great to get to Mr. Dunbar's concern or question, which is some guidance on when we deploy temporary structures versus hardened structures. And then I would really love to see, so this is just going to be a comment, but really love to see how we use things like this to promote emergency operations equitability across the municipality so that we are as prepared as possible, all the way from Peters Creek, down to Girdwood and beyond, because we do feel that challenge and stretch and, the stress of living in those communities and the concern around emergency events. So that's where my original question was like, where is the purchase of these with the intersection of the plan? I understand comprehensively where it is, but I would love to see that ultimately reflected as we've purchased equipment and received equipment through the pandemic, that those things are in the next update to the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Do members on the phone have any questions or comments?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Members of the administration, anything else you would like to mention?
Yes, ma'am. I'd like to tag on to what Mr. Peterson said respectfully. He hit it right on the head. We've talked a lot about emergency response, but in the day-to-day, let's say that we wanted to go do a shot clinic. We could set this up in the parking lot of the school and not affect that school. It could be dental exams of their teeth. We keep thinking about critical emergencies, but it gives us day-to-day operational capacity. So we were forced during this COVID-19 vaccination to use a lot of facilities that were Dempsey Ice Arena, right, as a great example. We could have set these up in other places, to Ms. Zalatel's point, for equitability. I could have deployed this at a soccer field in Mountain View, and it would have given us that ability. And that's what these really could have given us is, that secondary piece of a day-to-day just at the health department. We keep talking emergency response, but I think it gives us a lot of bandwidth at events. It could just be to go set up a first aid station at a giant concert before the concert begins. I know we've talked about plane crashes and these wildfires, but day-to-day, it's hard to get somebody to sit out in the blazing sun in July here. For us, it's hot, right, at 80 degrees. This gives us that place they can come in and say, I'm overheated. We give them a bottle of water, we assess them, and we say, let's call fire because they're going to need to be transported. So that's just some of the operational capacity increase that we would have. So thank you very much for hearing from us.
Thank you. Before I go to Ms. Zalatel, I have a quick question. How long do they take to take down and put back in the box?
5 to 10 minutes, ma'am.
Okay.
You just turn the power off, it starts to collapse, and then you fold it in, you roll it up, and you put it back in that cage. And that cage is like what the concierge at the hotel has, and it rolls back into the trailer. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that last comment spurred a question and a request. Is the types of uses Mr. Durace just detailed allowable under the grant? Does it have to be emergency, or is just expanded health capacity allowed? And then the comment is, if the answer to that is yes, could the documentation in the record for the approval of the item include those other potential uses? Because how it reads now is very much towards an emergency response by the health department. But if it has the intent to use, if we have any intention of using them beyond that, one, our funding source needs to allow it, and two, we need to be clear when we approve the funding that that's the intent.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Through the chair, again, our four main focus areas are that the mass prophylaxis, mass care, mass casualty, and medical surge. However, in that, anytime that we are able to utilize these, even for exercises or for events that we can participate in, it does give our personnel the added ability to practice how to set that up. As you saw in the video, we did utilize our own staff. We were able to teach other staff how to do that. The more times we can do that, the quicker we can tear it down and move it, or just setting it up. So it is allowable under this grant because this grant calls for us to increase our emergency preparedness utilizing the equipment that is approved. So having this on hand increases that. I'm not going to set it up and leave it somewhere for several months that somebody else is taking care of. That certainly doesn't increase our preparedness. Us being ready to respond to any current or future disaster is what's going to increase that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I appreciate that the act of setting them up and tearing them down and deploying them even for a dental clinic or something else as part of the emergency preparedness response. I would love to see that in the memo maybe, or a supplement too, because as the community sees these deployed possibly in that manner, it's really good that we have a clear record that the purchase was for emergency preparedness, but we sometimes use emergency preparedness items to keep familiar with using them, and then they expand and allow us to do better community service in our community. It's just always really important that we're clear about what we're purchasing, why we're purchasing it, and then how we may use it, especially if it's in a way someone might not be anticipating. I appreciate the creative use that will keep you all prepared. I just want the public to be well aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. I don't see any other members in the queue. I just, did you want to speak?
I did.
Oh,
Thank you.
go ahead.
So I just wanted to follow up on Ms. Zalatel's comment about the emergency operations plan. That plan is currently under revision, and it is being updated with lessons learned from not only the earthquake, but also COVID, and as quickly as we can turn over after action items from these emergencies that we keep having. It is under revision and implementing those best practices. And then as well, I've heard you guys talk a lot about operational conditions during an emergency or even a planned event for training and exercising. And I do want to echo what Director Gerace said about just recognizing that we have to maintain that flexibility according to the conditions of the event. We have a weather service person working with us every day when we're in the emergency operations center, letting us know what those conditions are. And in a situation like the avalanche, we did end up bringing in a municipal transportation, a bus, to allow the survivors, the people that were trapped behind that avalanche slide, to take respite there. And a tent like this may have been a helpful solution for those people to take to shelter. So I just wanted to offer that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Loach. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for being here, the three of you, Mr. Gerace, Mr. Isham, and Ms. Loach. We appreciate your time and the information. And again, this will be on the addendum for the meeting of June 21. And with that, have a nice weekend. We are adjourned.
No problem.